I could not sell a pre-emerge product to a grower, and they didn't see, and rightfully so, probably did not see a return on investment on that. I had been here 3 or 4 years, and almost overnight, we had a resistance to kochia. And when it came to, we only had Roundup beans at that time. When it came to a post-emerge application to clean that up, we couldn't do it. And so we had a lot of messes in the fields. So the following year, we started spending the right money and getting residuals out there to keep that kochia from coming, burning it down and keeping it from coming up. And we still were able to get by with Roundup progression. So, you know, from 11 years ago, spending 30, 40 bucks an acre with application, to once we got hit by kochia, you know, we were spending 50, 60 bucks an acre to keep that stuff, to the year that the Palmer water hemp resistant hits us hard. I mean, we instantly, over a 2-year period, are requiring, and I hate to always break it down to dollars, but that's what growers think, right? It's costing my growers, best case scenario is 90, but mostly 100 to 120 bucks an acre to keep this stuff clean. We've lost a lot of the technologies. Roundup, obviously. We're kind of on the edge with the 2,4-D stuff. We're kind of on the edge with Liberty. And as we'll show the group later today, we're more on the edge of losing the dicamba technology than what a lot of people realize. So the number one take home is if you're in the northern part of the United States and you're a grower today, to utilize all of those technologies. As things progress, you need to be ahead of the curve on getting out and doing a good pre-emerge and following that with residual herbicides post-emerge to keep that out. I mean, if it's $1 or $2 an acre difference between spraying one technology over the other, you know, become versed in all that stuff. And then the second thing is definitely layering the residuals all the time. Today in Nebraska, there's a lot of $100, $120, $30 an acre herbicide applications on soybeans. You don't have to be at that today to control your beans or your resistance in your crops. But starting with a good pre, putting a good residual post-emerge will help slow all that down. Know the herbicides you're spraying. On the residual piece, you know, what makes them tick, how much water makes them go, how long does the residual go on them, and then when you're out there making a burn down application, use quality adjuvants and use the right nozzles and the right spray pattern to get that.
When we talk about pigweed ID, it's like Betty Crocker in the kitchen. It's a step process. And for me, step one is the hairs on the stem, and then we go to the petiole length. Because the other pigweeds that we have in North Dakota, like Powell, Amaranth, and redroot pigweed, they will have hairs on the stem, whereas water hemp and Palmer will not. And when we talk about looking for those hairs on all the pigweeds, we always go towards the top of the plant. So towards the newest growth is where we look for the hairs. Because I don't care which pigweed it is, if we're looking for hairs at the base of the plant, a lot of those pigweeds will lose the hairs on the base of the plant as they mature, but the redroot pigweed and Powell will continue to have hairs towards the top of the plant. We're going to want to look at least a couple of the leaves on this plant, generally lower on the canopy, to look at the leaves with that really long petiole. And like I said, we'll do that with multiple leaves throughout the plant, just because we can have the occasional leaf that will have a longer petiole on all of our pigweeds. We always talk about this poinsettia type look. So if we look down on a plant, because of the long petioles, Palmer will push the leaves of the plant up towards the top and looks almost like a rosette if we're looking down on top of it. And water hemp tends to have more of a open canopy structure compared to Palmer. When it comes to seed heads, we can tell Palmer because we have male and female plants. Water hemp is the same, male and female plants, but Palmer, it's a little bit easier to tell the differences. So with Palmer, if we have a male plant, so this one here would be a male plant, if we grab the seed head, it's very smooth. Any of these seed heads will be very smooth because all these seed heads do, they just produce the pollen that then goes to the female plants. The female plants will be very prickly if we grab the plant. Palmer will have these bracts that are designed to kind of catch the pollen. Then they'll also just be a little bit spikier by design, probably a defense mechanism in place. But it's not just the seed heads that get spiky. We'll have these spiny bracts that appear at the leaf axils on the stems of the plant. So anywhere a petiole or a leaf blade attaches to the stem, we'll get bracts that can also accept pollen and produce seed. You know, these male plants might have kind of a look-alike bract, whereas these bracts on the female plant will prick you when you grab them. Like I said, every seed head that you grab will be spiny as well. I'm about 5'8", which puts this plant at probably 7.5, maybe 8 feet tall. So we wanted to see how easy it's going to be for me to pull the taproot off of this plant out of the ground. So here's where I get to embarrass myself. Oh yeah. Ain't coming. I'm not saying I'm the strongest man in the world. Maybe San Markel could pick this out of the ground, but I can't.
All right, one more time. You got to do that shot. You got it. Come on. Whoa. Ah, my goodness. Ah.
I can get a picture of my blister later.
I can't stop laughing. Joe is a lot of fun to work with, and I'm guessing that that's a plant he had to pull for the video on the ID. So, so just imagining him working up a sweat to try to get that out before doing that video is pretty funny. Now, Angie, you've seen a lot of Palmer. Especially, well, not here, but when you went down to Nebraska to learn about it. And I think we have a picture of you down in the field there. And, you know, what did you learn down there? And also, you know, I'd like to know actually how many times it would take you to pull one out of the ground too, just because, just curious.
Of course you would ask that. Yeah, but there's a picture of myself. So yes, just to get any scare out there, that is not in Steele County. That was down when we went down to North Platte, Nebraska, to actually the North Dakota Soybean Council helped funded a tour for us to go down there, see this beast firsthand, really. And so just to kind of take some of that fear down. That is not here and not local, but yeah, it's you know, that first video you got to see was of Matt Larson, and like Abby said, he's a CHS agronomist down by North Platte, Nebraska, and I hope you all heard him talking about how much they spend in weed control in their soybeans. Did you happen to catch those numbers? Anywhere between 90 to 100, 130, $140 per acre for weed control alone in their soybeans. And I know if that was the case for each of you, we'd be out of business, let's be honest. And so I hope you gathered that and took that to heart, because Palmer is real, it's there. And you know, TJ talked a little bit earlier about our toolbox, right? So using different types of control to manage our problems, and our toolbox is kind of taking a beating when it comes to that, using that herbicide tool. And Abby, what really scares me with Palmer is we're looking at about resistance to 7 to 8 different modes of action. Okay, so that what I mean by that is, so the first two most common modes of action that we see Palmer resistance in is our ALS, our group 2 herbicides, and then our ever so famous go to back pocket application, our Roundup, our group 9. And so those are the big game players that we really see pretty much confirmed resistance all over the board. But then we're looking at, you know, our group 14s, our PPOs. We're just seeing a ton of resistance with Palmer when it comes to an herbicide application. And that's why I want to talk about it. I want to be an advocate for you to really start thinking about how we manage weeds and how weed identification really should be in the forefront of one of your toolboxes.
So why has it been showing up here, and why is it so difficult to manage as a weed?
That is a great question. So earlier this morning, we heard Sam Markel talk about anything that can move SCN, so soil, wind. It's same thing goes for our weed seeds, right? And And it doesn't take much for that weed seed to easily, we're so blessed with this lucky red river of the north, right, where everything flows north. And so not only those environmental factors, but a lot of times it's unintentional equipment transfer. So it's a blessing that we have custom harvest units, right? I mean we need that tool for getting harvest done. But the problem is if those units aren't clean when they come up to our northern plains and up to North Dakota to start, making those combine, getting crops off, that is a really easy place for those palmer seeds to be housed and spread so quickly. I just want to talk to you and showcase where we found palmer so far in the state. And so this is actually a map from the North Dakota Department of Ag showing us since 2018, when palmer was first identified in North Dakota, where we've had hot spots. And I want to just explain them a little bit. So Benson County, the reason why you see Benson and Richland County kind of striped is because we have found palmer in those counties in two different areas and have a pretty good idea of two different modes of how those seeds got there. And the counties in the orange, so down south of Bismarck, the Bismarck, Mandan, Grant, and Sioux counties, those actually, and Abby, this is really important going into talking about into a prevent plant year, is because those counties had high palmer incidences because of contaminated millet seed. So we had a lot of producers that were raising millet for hay that year, and the seed originated from southern states. And unfortunately, it was contaminated with palmer seeds. And so I know for our growers that really looked at those PP acres this past 2020 season, we really needed to look at and source where our cover crop seeds are coming from, because that can be one way that palmer can find its way into North Dakota. The other, the one that really, really scares me and hits close to home on that map, you're going to see Barnes County. Okay. And I don't say this because I don't want to scare you, but I want you to be aware that that case in Barnes County is very, very large. And the reason why it's blown up, it's actually been there, they can estimate it's been there for a few years now, is because there's a producer that has been basically importing in sunflower screenings as a livestock feed source. And that's great, right? I mean, it's a cheap feed, it can work great. The problem is it wasn't sourced in state. It was sourced out of state in a southern area where palmer is very high and prevalent. And so that region, and I wish Joel could have been on this morning to talk a little bit more, but he said I could bring it up, is that case is really large. And that concerns me because it's very close to home and right outside of our county border. And so that can be another way, Abby, to get palmer introduced, is through palmer infested screenings. And unfortunately, the screening market isn't really, it's not really regulated. And so we can't just say, well, we'll stop bringing in screenings. It really has to be a producer driven decision. And the other, as far as I know, the case in Cass County, it actually sounded like a homeowner case where they found it within a flower bed, believe it or not. And so we're working really hard with our gardeners and our horticulturalists. And I know that sounds silly, but they're a key role in this too, because there are some amaranth species that are actually ornamental. And so believe it or not, we get a lot more calls in asking, about weed ID in an ornamental situation because of that palmer presence.
Man, that's a little bit terrifying seeing some of those things, Angie. But I think, we only have a minute or two left. I think we shouldn't be sweeping this under the rug, right? So if you find palmer in your field, you need to be calling Angie, right?
Absolutely. For a few years now, after those Nebraska trips, I have encouraged each and every one of you and all of the growers that I work with, you need to text or call me. if you have, and some of you that are on today, you have, and I'm glad you did, because we have had some suspicious cases, but so far, so good, Abby. We haven't, I actually had an agronomist reach out to me, and I was pretty nervous, but it turned out to be Powell Amaranth, which obviously is still in the Amaranth family and still needs to be controlled, but it didn't concern me as much. And one other message that I want to share with all of you is, I don't want to put the fear of God per se into you about Palmer, because we really also need to think about its cousin, which is water hemp. Water hemp can be just as devastating as Palmer. And the scary part is, Abby, is we have water hemp. We're dealing with it right now. And so I really want you as growers to be proactive and also taking that time to scout for water hemp and manage those populations that you have, so it doesn't get out of control, because water hemp has so many resistant herbicides that are resistant to it as well. And so that's something we really need to be on the lookout and work with, is the problem we have now, which is water hemp, and it's growing.